my name is Tamar, and I'm going to continue the webinar for the second portion. The topic that we're going to be talking about is self-control. Now, the first portion that you had was about the character versus personality. So you got a great feel for that. And one of the character traits that's a positive one is self-control. Now, the book that I'm working out of is the Parenting Manual, and I'm starting in Lesson 5, and I'm going to be going through procedures 1 through 7. So we're going to start out with some basic things first, so then we can move on to the problem solving with a lack of self-control. So what are the roles of a parent? Because there's a lot of different beliefs on what the roles of a parent are. So who can tell me what they think the roles of a parent are? Yes. Okay, to have a lot of patience. That's definitely a role as a parent. Yes.
To protect your children.
To protect our children. Yes.
Disciplinarian.
Disciplinarian.
Possibly to provide food, clothing, and shelter.
Okay, to provide the necessities, food, clothing, and shelter. One of the things that was mentioned was to be a disciplinarian. So what is the first thing that you think of when you hear that word, to be a disciplinarian? Go ahead and just be, yes. Punishment, right. So actually when we finish this lesson, you're going to see that being a disciplinarian isn't necessarily punishment. Okay, because we want to think positive. So we want to get to where we need to be before it gets to that punishment stage. Okay, then you can, if it gets to that stage, then you'll be able to handle it with self-control. But one of the things that I want you to think about as a role as a parent is being a teacher. Okay, so I know that children go to school and they have a teacher there, or maybe they go somewhere else and they learn to train something on a job and they may look at them as a teacher. But we need to start looking at ourselves as parents as teachers so that our children will learn from us, because we want them to be productive citizens in society. Okay? One of the things that is so great about this book is, have you ever said to yourself or heard someone say, this is really hard. I never thought parenting would be so difficult. There's not a manual for that. You ever heard that? Or maybe I've said it. And this is the manual. This is the manual to all the questions that you have as a parent. Because let's face it, what's out there for us, the entertainment and all that, shows that parenting is very easy, right? Think about the different things you've seen over your years, is that there might be a problem, but it's solved in 30 minutes. And that's it, right? And then there's this problem that occurs with this child, but after that 30-minute program is over, it's solved and everything is just fine, and then the program ends. Well, that's a very big misconception that we're taught from our youth. So then when we become a parent and we have real issues with our children, then we're not quite sure what to do because it's not solved in 30 minutes. Now, what we're talking about, though, is having self-control as a parent. So really, our issues with our children stem from our issues of maybe having a lack of being an effective parent. So that's what we're talking about today. One of the most important character traits a person can develop is self-control. How can we teach a child to have self-control if we are not practicing ourselves? So another saying that I've heard when I was very young as well is, do what I say, not as I do. How many of you have ever heard that before? Now, you just need to do what I tell you to do. Don't worry about what I'm doing. But no, I told you. You just need to listen to me. I'm your mother, and that's it. And that's the bottom line, no questions asked, right? Or children should be seen and not heard, right? So we have to throw that out. We have to throw that concept out because it doesn't make any sense. Do as I say, not as I do. Well, who do they learn from? A child doesn't come out of the womb knowing how to do anything. We have to teach them. They learn to walk because they see other people walk. So we have this beautiful little baby, right? And they just lay there and they're just so sweet and just so beautiful and everything we ever wanted. Well, that time where they pretty much just sleep, need to be changed and fed, is very short. And before you know it, a few months later, they are starting to express themselves. They are starting to let you know that they want to be picked up, that they don't want to be laid down, or that maybe different things. They cry to tell us their needs. Okay, well, just a few short months later, they're walking and they're getting into things. And so what is one of the things that we might do as a parent? No. No, 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 no. And that's one of the children's first words is no. Well, it's the same way when we lose self-control. Now, have you ever, maybe myself or yourself, or ever seen a parent going, now I said stop doing that. Stop it, stop doing that. I just told you to stop doing that. Have you ever heard that? Or how about this? I'm going to count to 10. 1, 2, and the child's walking over there and reaching their hand, and you're like, I told you to stop it, and you lost your thought, and then you start back over at 1 again. You could count all day long. But the whole thing is that think about how a person looks when they're doing that, and they're saying, I told you to stop it. And their eyes get big, and their voice starts to get kind of nasty. Can you look at that as being a temper tantrum coming from a parent? Okay, it's no different. I mean, you might even say, I said stop it, right? Because that child is just, maybe they're siblings and they're arguing. And you see, and you could see the frustration that comes over that parent. Well, what's the difference if a child does that or if an adult does it? It's still a temper tantrum. It's a lack of self-control. Okay, so let's think about that as we continue on with this lesson. Now, it's very important to have self-control because it's the foundation of a positive character. Think of all the problems that can be solved within a family when each family member learns to have that self-control. A lot of problems, because there's going to be issues, there's going to be conflicts. And one of the big misconceptions about self-control, when a person loses that self-control, that it's always off of the emotion of anger. But there's many emotions that can come up that you might not have self-control for. Think about jealousy. Okay, that might not necessarily stem from anger, just jealousy, especially if you have siblings, you have more than one, but it can also happen to someone that's just an only child. It just depends on the situation. So we have to kind of look at these things differently. I know that maybe some here have grown children, maybe some have new babies, maybe some are going to have children. It doesn't really matter. All the concepts apply for all the ages. So self-control is controlling our own emotions, desires, and actions in order to arrive at a decision that is morally correct. So it's arriving at that decision that won't cause harm. Because let's face it, we see in the news that the abuse is it's becoming more and more. And there's many different types of abuse, and it's in the book, and it explains earlier in the chapter of character versus personality about the different types of abuse, with the verbal abuse and the physical abuse and all of those things. And it stems from that lack of self-control. And really, when someone doesn't have control over their emotions, it's really just a lack of training, right? They just don't know how to control their emotions. And that's what I love about this book so much, and that's why I said that it's that manual that we've looked for as parents. Because it trains us how to get ourselves together. It tells us step by step how to do that. But, I mean, the book's not going to do it for us. We have to apply the concepts. Okay, this is a wonderful book, but I can read it 10 times and tell everybody that I've read it 10 times. But then when I'm having a situation with my children, and that frustration starts to rise up in me, if I don't practice it, it's just another book on the shelf. We would all like to think that we have complete control over our thoughts and emotions, especially as adults. We think, well, I can handle this. Okay, children I have no patience for children. Have you ever said that to yourself and you actually have children? What do you mean we have no patience for children? We have children. So think about that, because when we don't have patience for children, it's really, we don't have that self-control to be able to deal with the situations that's coming up. A child looks to us for that guidance, okay? And all of us come from different backgrounds, different upbringings, maybe have gone through different not so nice things in our lives. But we can break that cycle, and we can teach our children, just as the answer over here, is to then not do those things to their children. So in order to have self-control, to learn to have self-control, we have to be able to solve problems and conflicts. Okay. The first step in developing self-control and making it a consistent part of our character is to realize that self-control governs all aspects of life. The greatest misconception is that it only is to manage the emotion of anger. Although anger is a powerful emotion, if it's not controlled, it can turn to rage, and emotions such as jealousy, if uncontrolled, can cause harm to others as well. And like rage, it can lead to consequences. Now, these are real feelings. So there are going to be times where children can make, maybe something that they have done can upset us. But being upset and having rage is two completely different things. When we get to the point to where we have totally lost that self-control, it's dangerous for our children because we don't think clearly. You cannot think clearly if you're so enraged about a situation, and that's when we might do something that we can't take back. Now, whether it causes permanent harm or whether it causes emotional scarring, we can't just change that once it's done. Now, if we have fallen into that, and it's tough being a parent, we can change that from then on. We can change that way of handling things, and then we can help our children to understand that they can be safe with us. Now, that's also physically and emotionally safe. Being a caretaker is more than just providing the food, clothing, and shelter. It's also providing the well-being for the child to feel safe, the child to know that they can go to that parent and they can express themselves that they're upset or they didn't like a situation. Because we want our children to communicate with us. Okay, it's not that we want to hear when they're upset. We want to know when there's a problem. We might not agree with them, but us as parents, we have to know these things so that we can help them through it. Because being a parent is tough, but being a child is pretty tough too. Okay, but we can make that easier on them as being the parent that has control over their emotions. Okay, so let's see. So in those situations that we may feel overwhelmed and confused, we have to remain calm, evaluate the situation, and think about an appropriate way of dealing with it, and if needed, to seek that counsel that we may have. And sometimes we may have to go to a third party, right? We have the family, may have to get that advice because sometimes we're in the situation, it's really hard to see the way out of it. Okay, but the main thing is to stop. If we feel like that feeling is starting to get control over us rather than us having control over that feeling, then we need to stop right then and say, okay, let me get my thoughts together. When we take an honest look at the situation, at the situations where we have made inappropriate or negative decisions, we'll discover a pattern of behavior. So if we really examine ourselves, and you know what, a nice time to do that is after we've put the children to bed, and we go and maybe look at them while they're sleeping and think, okay, how did my day go? Okay, well, I really got upset about this situation. And you're looking at that child because they're quiet at that moment. They're just sleeping. It's very peaceful. Then it's really easy to see that we want to change the next day, right? To be able to see that child is going to wake up in the morning, and guess what? Children are very forgiving. And they will wake up that next morning and give us a hug and treat us as if we had never done anything wrong. And that's the great thing about children. But we have to we can't continue because, as they get older, it does turn into something different. So that's why we want to break that pattern. Okay, so by taking an overall look at how we handle ourselves when the heat is on, we can begin to pinpoint problem areas. These problem areas are called triggers. Okay, so triggers. Triggers are incidences that bring out specific responses from us. So you can call it triggers. There's another word for it, a test, push my buttons, right? Anything like that. The child can really push my buttons. Remember, it's not the child pushing the buttons. It's that trigger within us. And each of us have different triggers. I mean, what I might not have a problem with, it might be very difficult for you. And we might be eating lunch together, and you have a trigger that's stimulated or whatever, then I might look at you like wow, that really bothered you, and it wouldn't bother me, and it could occur the same way with me as well. So these triggers are what we have to examine. And once we admit that we have triggers and that it's our problem, not our child's problem, it's our problem on how we're dealing with it, then we can start to really get down to the bottom of it and find out what causes those triggers. Because there will be a pattern. You start keeping track of it, you will see a pattern, and you'll be able to then think about things beforehand. Okay, so steps to developing self-control. First, we have to acknowledge that there are triggers in our life that we have a difficult dealing with appropriately. I think we all can say that there's different situations in our lives that are difficult for us to deal with, right? And whether it be, we can go through all the things, but I don't really want to be negative, but we can go through all the news events, the drug addictions, the abuse, the different things. All stems from the inability to deal with that situation, right? That pressure, that depression. We see there's a lot of commercials right now for depression medication. Well, those are triggers that are being pushed, and then they fall into that depression and they take the medication. Does it solve that problem? It doesn't solve. The triggers are still there. Okay, they're still there. It's just that maybe they're able to forget about those triggers or whatever, but the child still feels those when those triggers are then set forward. So then we prepare ourselves for the fact that triggers can surface unexpectedly. And then we need to have a plan to handle our triggers appropriately when they arise. And how many of you have heard the STOP acronym? Right? I know a lot of you have been here for the other webinar classes, and we've gone through the STOP acronym. And when I first saw it, I thought, wow, that's a really great acronym for children. It's cute. It's a little stop sign, big letters, stop, think about your options, then proceed with the right choice. And then I started thinking, wow, that when I started to examine my triggers, I started to think, I need to stop and think about my options and proceed with the right choice. So that's what's so great about the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program, is that it helps us to see what's within us. Because part of developing self-control is to see what's in me, not her. She's going to make her own choices, and she's going to make her own choices. I can't make those choices for her. I can only control myself. I can't even totally control my child. I can sit them down in a chair, but I can't completely control that child. The only thing I can do is set that example for them so that they will know how to handle themselves in those situations, because we know that as children grow and they start going to school and they're dealing with other people other than just their family, they're going to have situations. So that what I can do as a parent is I can show them by my example. How many of you have had conversations with your children and you could talk and talk and talk, and then they'll turn around and do exactly what you talked to them about not doing? Okay? Well, it works the same way with the example. If we can talk and talk and talk to them, but if we're not practicing what we're talking, then they're going to see our actions more. That's what they're going to remember. That's what they're going to remember. You're going to say, now I told you that you shouldn't be fighting. But yet, then I'm having a fight with my child. I'm counting to 10, 50 times a day. And yet the child is still able to do what they wanted to do because I'm exhausted and I'm tired. And I'm tired of counting, so I just go ahead and give in. We have to control the situation and not allow the situation to control us. Now, when something occurs that triggers an emotional response from us, we stop. This is one suggestion, and maybe you could share with me, be thinking while I'm sharing this with you, some suggestions that you might have to be able to get yourself calmed down in a situation where maybe a trigger has been set off. So you could stop, take a deep breath. You can even hold your breath for a couple of seconds if necessary, and then slowly exhale. Now, it says stop, take a deep breath, and not, I told you to stop it, I think I get lightheaded if I keep doing that. Whew, I should have done that too many times. See, it's unhealthy for us to do that. So there's a difference there, right? And I know that we probably have seen that done where you can tell that, okay, the parent's taking a deep breath, but they're going to pass out because what's a little woozy, because that's not what the book is telling us to do. This book here is telling us to slow down. It only has to be as fast as we make it. Slow down. Take a deep breath. Okay, I can feel a trigger being pushed here. I see this situation. I've got two that are, fighting with each other, whatever. Or maybe I just said, please don't do that. Please, I heard this in the first portion. Oh, honey, please get down from there, right? Please, I really need you to get down from there. And then it goes like that. I said get down, right? And the child's going, and climbing higher and climbing higher, and then you feel that trigger. So can I just stop right then? And there's danger. Can I say, okay, deep breath in, deep breath out? Or do I have to control myself and say, okay, this is going to cause harm to my child. So I need to go get the child down. Am I going to yank him down? Get down here. Right? I say, okay, come down here. And then I have to be able to say, okay, stay right here for a moment. And it's not a great thing to let the child see that you're breathing, So that's where you do it in your head, right? Okay, I'm going to calm down now because I want my child to learn something from this. Because if they had fallen from there, they could not only be hurt, but it really could kill them. So then you explain to the child, okay, well, I understand that you like to climb, whatever, but this isn't the place to climb. Now, maybe later on we can go outside and we have an actual appropriate thing to climb on, little ladder with those things you go across, monkey bars or whatever, and explain to them. So sometimes you can't always take that deep breath. You can't take that time out. It depends on the situation. So who else has some suggestions that maybe they have tried that has worked? Yes?
I used to make my daughter go to her room, think about why she's going to get in trouble, and then she'll come back and give me 20 different reasons, none of them the right one, and I will make her go right back into it, and then she'll come eventually. It took her like 10 minutes to realize her mistake. And then I used to tell her, now tell me how you correct it.
Okay, so you said daughter? Okay, so you had your daughter take responsibility for her own actions. So how old?
She was about 7 at the time.
About 7. So definitely 7, they're able to go through that thinking process. You couldn't do that with a 2-year-old. They would just sit in there and throw everything around the room and kick and scream, right? So at 7 years old, she basically what you did is you taught your daughter how to be responsible for her actions and how to be a problem solver. And that's great because we're not always going to be there to solve their problems for them. So I don't know if you heard over here, but her daughter was about 7, and she would send her to her room, but not just go to your room. She would say, I want you to go to your room, and I want you to think about what you've done. And she said she would come back out then, and she would have 10 wrong things. Of course, it would be, because, and it wasn't, so she says, no, that's wrong, right? Now I want you to really go back to your room, and I want you to really think about what you did and why it was wrong. And then she didn't stop there, and I like this part because she said, now I want to know how you could change it. And that's great to do for children so that they can be problem solvers because, they're going to be in school. And was she going to school at that 7 years old? So at school, she's not able to say, Mom, I'm in this situation. Tell me what to do. So I think that's really great. A great example. Right there. Yes.
Well, this doesn't always work, but you might not always have the thing to climb around like what you said, but if you explain to the child, well, you can't do this because you might get hurt, and you explain that to the child and say, but you may do this, and then give them something to get their focus off of what they're doing, the negative behavior, and give them something positive that they can do, and make it seem like it's something that they would want to do, get their focus onto that instead.
That's a great answer. Did you hear her over here? Okay, so I think that's a great answer as well, because getting that focus onto something else, because, really sometimes, especially if you're in summer break and they're not used to being home all the time, and if we're not watching our children, they could get to where really they only do things because they don't have anything else to do. So that's a great opportunity then to get their focus onto something that's more positive, something that won't cause harm, and also explaining to them why it caused harm. I saw another hand, yes.
Well,
being a mom and also working with children, I do my best to remember that I was once a child. And so that really helps me to put things in perspective. And then I remember the fact that I was treated fairly and I was treated with kindness, even when I did something wrong. And so keeping that in mind, it's always like, okay, even though this child is just really going out in left field, I can handle this child properly.
Right.
And that helps me.
Did you hear her over here? And I think that's a really great point that you brought up, because even when a child, if I do something that was wrong, even as an adult, I don't want to be treated harshly. I want to be treated kindly. I need to be corrected, whatever it is. Maybe it's something on my job, whatever it might be. But I don't want to be talked down to. And the same goes for our children. They're not going to learn. They tune it right out. They're not even going to hear us. And then we become more frustrated because you can see that button go off. And you can see that it's their eyes glaze over, right? Because they don't want to be talked to harshly. And remember, through the other lessons that we've heard with the webinar this week, is that one of the character traits is respect. So even through correction, we need to show our children respect. We don't need to be yelling. Yelling is never the answer. The only time yelling is the answer is if they're all the way across the yard and they're going to be hurt and you say, hey, to get their attention. But to scream and yell at a child, it has never and will never solve problems. It just won't. And it's been tried and tested for many, many years, right? And I have never heard a success story out of it, other than creating more yellers. Okay, have you ever had the neighbor that all you can hear is just yell? Or maybe I was the neighbor that was doing the yelling. Okay, there was no peace there between the child and the parent. Okay, so I want to briefly go back over having the self-control and the triggers. Now, really quick, we see all these examples of having a lack of self-control. And then we have some that have, you can tell, where they're communicating with their children. And we don't just have children to raise children. We have children to enjoy children. Okay, we have them to be able to have those great times with them. We want them to remember their childhood as something great, even through the bumpy times, because every age has its bumpy times. And just a little thing of mine, let's just not label those bumpy times terrible 2s, terrible 3s, so on, and 4s, 5s, all the way up to 15, 18. We don't want to label them so that they think that that's what's expected of them. Okay, so these are the different examples, and sadly, it can lead to that. When we don't show our children how to have self-control by us having self-control, then we see these things over here, the fighting, the handcuffs, the shootings, the bullying. It comes from somewhere, okay? And although we're not with them all the time as they have to go out into society, we can sure leave them with something positive to think about and how to handle the situations. Because let's face it, there's a lot of pressure right now. There's a lot of pressure with the economy. There's a lot of pressure with the lack of jobs. There's a lot of pressure with trying to put food on the tables, with parents working day and night, more than one job, all of these different things. But we can still handle these things having self-control and having our self-control with our children, because it's not their fault that there's a lot of pressure. It's not their fault at all. So I just want to leave you with this, because this is one of the things that you could try, is to start monitoring what are your triggers. So you have on one side, and I made it big. You might not, might want to just do it on a little piece of paper. You maybe even make a mental note of it. You have the triggers. So this example is when I have given an instruction twice to a child and they don't move. One of the solutions could be to call the child by name and ask whether they heard the instruction, and give it again. Ask the child, what did I say? So that you know that they understood, and then you move forward from that. So we are at an end to our time, and I want to encourage you, this is the manual. This is the manual that we all need. We need to not only think about this as for our children, this is our parenting manual. This is how we can be productive parents in society and have our children grow to be productive people in society. I want to thank you for coming and participating, and let's keep practicing self-control. Thank you.